thousands of thousands.
You
Yeah,
bet.
we are officially live in the smoking section. Yeah. This is IPaintCreatures,
Yeah.
IPC. If you want to tell people who you are, kind of what you do briefly, and then we'll jump straight into it because I got a lot of questions for you.
Okay. Um, my moniker is I Paint Creatures and IPC, and that's been a tag of mine for a long, long time. I have a lot of roots in street art. My main uh, foundation of who I am is a spoken word poet. I was involved with the poetry slam scene for a long time, and of course, it bleeds over into hip hop, and I use the word in all my foundation because I'm a fantastical painter. You can see some of my paintings behind me, and you can check it out on Instagram. And I'm the creator of an epic story called Matsu, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, matter of fact, that was one of the first things. But before that, what made you realize? This is something I always like to ask artists: is what made you realize the inclination you had for it? What was like, because you were saying like your main roots, right, is spoken word poetry. What was that moment? Where was the time where you said, "Hey, this is something I can do"? Like it was the one that either you felt or you knew other people resonated with it. What was that? Walk us through that.
Well, it kind of goes back because um, you're familiar with my Wikipedia, and so
Mm-hmm.
I pretty much lay out my whole story right there. And I had a father who was a 10th degree black belt in Aikido, and he kind of gave up that and put it more on the shelf as a hobby. Um, and then through that, I found out basically I have samurai roots, and so but my family, including my mother and my father and my grandparents, were in the Japanese internment camps, and so basically growing up, I lost my whole heritage. They didn't want to talk about it. They took away my language, and then unfortunately, my father, like I said, he kind of shelved his martial arts, and he passed away when I was 10 years old with stomach cancer. And he wasn't like a red meat eater or any of the like things we do in this world that could cause that kind of cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I pretty much grew up, back in the day as a latchkey kid, and my mom had to go to work and pay the bills, and so I basically went to the streets. And the only thing that kind of saved me from a life of basically crime and what the streets do to a youngster is art. And through that journey, I reconnected back with my grandmother on my mother's side, and found out she was what's called a Shigin poet, which were the singers and chanter poets of Japan, the royal court of Japan. And
Mm-hmm.
so, of course, couldn't speak to her because she spoke Japanese, and basically just um, sent me on my journey to retrace that. And then of course along the way found Shigin has a lot to do with painting because it's samurai art, so it's painting, storytelling, poetry, music, all the disciplines of the art. And basically just got some opportunities in when the year after my father died. I reconnected my mom because she was trying to put me in all kinds of programs that would, keep me off the streets and keep me off the trouble. And I, of course, rebelled against all that. And then I think it was the Cub Scouts. They had like a theater badge, and it got me in theater, and I just felt at home there. I was kind of estranged from everything else, but theater, that's where I related to you being a dancer, and
Mm-hmm.
found the theater. And then something strange happened. I got a role as a strongman, and basically putting on a costume one day with my mother, and we reconnected because she was helping with my costume, but she found a big like softball lump on my left arm. And I was just a little kid going, I'm strong. And
Uh-huh.
tapping, and she's like, that's not a muscle.
Oh
And
no.
so I think that following week we went to Stanford Children's Hospital, and basically they told me that basically it wasn't a muscle, and it was a unknown tumor. And
Mhm.
basically the one of the top physicians at Stanford said I needed an amputation, and I probably wouldn't live past 14, because if it had cancer or some deadly disease, and it would go right to my blood, because it was right on the left arm bone. And of
Mhm.
course, my mother, having the roots, being samurai, and to the Shigin poets, went alternate roots. And you can see I have a left arm, and
Yeah.
I'm here a lot more years than that. So in that time period, like, when my father was in there, I had got removed from school. So didn't grow up like a lot of kids, influenced by a lot of popular media. Probably the only thing that was there was music, but still, just I had all time to myself. So that was the first time I started sketching, but I also found myself sketching and then writing, just writing. And I didn't know it was poetry back then, but basically writing poetry. And then of course the next year after my father died, then I was in the hospital. So I continued, and I would find, those medical forms, and start drawing. And I started drawing these weird creatures, I thought were monsters back then, and
Mhm.
telling little stories about them. And when I look back, it was stories, kind of metaphysically about what I was going through, because I couldn't identify it with normal kids. And I had a male doctor or nurse at the time, um, come up and see what I was doing. And so he said, basically, that's incredible what you're doing. And he came back a few days later, and he gave me a watercolor set. And I never did paint or anything. And I kind of just self-taught myself how to do it. And so I started watercolor painting. And then I kept a connection with that nurse. And then one day he said, you should come paint these for this section of the hospital. And I was like, okay. So I was going through my own diagnosis, and eventually would go through a surgery where they removed the tumor. But yeah, I went there, and I didn't know at the time, but it was the terminally ill section of the children's hospital. So all the kids that were dying. And so that's when I started doing these crazy kind of, I mean, I know them now as creatures. Back then I would say they're monsters. But I started, like, I find out this one girl liked music or liked hip hop. And so I drew some headphones on the creature, and, a microphone coming out of its head. And, and the nurse encouraged me, and he said, you're giving hope to a lot of these kids. And so I continued to do that, and made it past the surgery and got healed, but still was, basically out on the streets trying to just um, see who I was. And luckily I was around a lot of musicians at the time, and they would do gigs, and they would just say, hey man, we need a flyer. So that's
Mhm.
when I started doing, some traditional illustration and doing these flyers. And then I can remember one day a friend of mine, he gave me like $25 for a flyer. And I think
Wow.
it was the shifting point of like going, whoa, wait a minute. Like, I do this art, and I don't know really why I did it. I didn't know my heritage, that my family was all artists and
Mhm.
samurai at the time. And so I just continued to do it. And I think that was the shifting point when I saw that art was viable. And then I heavily got into a lot of music, at the time. And then hip hop really influenced me to see MCs that were making money off, basically what I saw as poetry. And,
Mhm.
and then it goes on and on and on that. And then there's some stories in between I'm sure we'll get to, but basically, um, I made it up to Chico, California, and that's where I live now. And I had some other very influential friends who were like, into computers and stuff, and they were like, what you do there, you can make a living at it. And basically, I had a roommate who really believed in me, and he kind of had a bet with me late night, and he was like, you need to send your work and put a portfolio, I didn't know what that was, together, and send it out to companies. And so he kind of forced me to write down companies that maybe influenced me. And I told you a story that I wasn't connected to a lot of pop art, so I really didn't know what to write. and
Mhm.
and then I ended up writing Lucasfilm. and he ended up helping me put a portfolio together and send it to them. And I'm sure we'll get into that more, but I got the opportunity to work directly with George Lucas. So
Dude,
that really stamped, okay, I'm not just scribbling anymore. I'm doing something. And that project connected me back to education. And I found, like, I want to help youngsters that grew up like me, without a father, or had to turn to the
mhm.
streets, and show them that, creativity is a lifesaver.
Yeah, you kind of had asked before the show started. You had asked about my name, where, um, you know, yeah, though corpse has a certain, meaning to me. I even created a certain meaning where creativity offers our people's self-expression, and I made it a little quirky with this K and this X, but I truly do believe that for a lot of kids, I grew up in a single parent household. And I think for a lot of kids who are growing up, no matter how they got there, right, but they find themselves in that position, I think that art, right, or these creative spaces is one of the best places to find them in, and to really promote them to be in. I feel like, though dancing was like my love, like it was like my everything, I was doing theater with my sister. We did like this Vietnam War, like high school thing reenactment. Um, and there was a part where, and I was in weight training, so I was lifting a lot of weights. I was like 16 years old. They put us up there with like our shirts off, and you hear everybody scream and go crazy. And I was like, dude, this is so cool. Like this is awesome, bro. Like we work out every day. I'm in wrestling, I do basketball, I do all these sports. We're up here. Everyone's losing their minds. Like I could do this every day of my life. Like if I could do just this little number right here. And so it was more encouraging for me to do more stuff like that and find myself in places like that. Um though I was always good at like drawing and painting and these things, like graphing up and stuff. My stuff was always, I really loved poetry, and I've even done like my own. I even have a book on Amazon too. Um, but for for me, like I seen like you're hosting these poetry slams, and especially for people who might not know what slam, like a poetry slam is. Like could you explain, like, better off, like, the poetry slam that you were a part of, kind of explain what that is for people, and
Yeah, well, I was involved with the National Poetry Slam, which was supported by Poetry Slam Incorporated, which is no more, sad to say. But it's basically, I can tell you the basic story where it came from. But basically, Poetry Slam is kind of a made up competition to basically get people to listen to poetry more. And it combines, it's more, the more appropriate term I like to use is performance poetry. So it's incredible theater arts mixed with literature, really good literature. And basically, he's a real good friend of mine. His name is Mark Smith, and he started the Poetry Slam. And how it got started, he was a construction worker, and he loved poetry, and he started writing a lot of poetry. But then he found, like, in the kind of game of poetry, you would submit a poem, and then there'd be these committees at these colleges and these high up places that would get in a room and decide if your poem was, viable enough to share or publish. And so the story is, in Chicago, he used to run an open mic, and then he saw that the open mic, one night, over in the left hand corner was a sports game on the television. And then he was over in the other corner trying to run this poetry reading. It wasn't a slam yet, right? And
Mhm.
he noticed that all the people over there watching the sport weren't paying attention at all, and they were actually disrupting it. And he felt, that, for poetry really to work, people got to listen. I mean, that's the connection of it, because it doesn't have all this fancy music and distractions like that. And so the stories, he put a $5 bill up in the air, and he said the poet that can basically get the attention of this crowd gonna win. And it
Mhm.
worked. I mean, he basically, and that's where theatrics married with the poetry slam, and so he came up with a game that was actually has a lot of deep roots. If you go back in time to even Japanese culture, to European culture, and I'm sure a lot of other cultures, competitive poetry was a big thing. Like I know, like in the Viking tradition, they used to send the poet to the front of the boat before they went into war, and
Mm,
battle back and forth, and say my wave is bigger than gonna crush down, and to kind of get the hype and the
mhm,
setting of it. And so he kind of took that concept and he just said, let me get, the original was let me get 3 judges and let's get them from the normal people. So it's not that high up thing of, the universities, how they were publishing. And let's make a scale, 1 to 10 with decimal points, and then basically let's let the poet read, and then let's put up the scores. And so he started doing that, and uh, a bunch of poets. He eventually started to do it at the Green Mill in Chicago, and that's a jazz club. And so he won the poetry slam. He named it the poetry slam, and then a bunch of the poets that were got seasoned in that poetry slam started moving around the country. So they moved to Boston and San Francisco, and they basically carried on the tradition. They opened, instead of an open mic poetry reading, they did a poetry slam. And so eventually, I think the first year was in the 80s sometime, I think maybe 81. They held the first national poetry slam in San Francisco, and it had 4 teams on it. So that was the birth of what used to happen at the national poetry slam is group poems. So
mm,
pretty much kind of was writing the hip hop thing. So it'd be duets or trios or 4 poets to get up there, and that's when the art form started to really develop, because what the poetry slam did is start to at least get an audience that was attentive. And
mm.
so, like I said, it was theater arts mixed with literature. And to this day, some of the most amazing poets have come out of the whole scene. And it's sad that Poetry Slam Incorporated is not going on, but I think it still has a legacy. And I've kind of left that form of it, and I'm more into basically puppetry, and taking the art of this theater mixed with great literature and bringing it to film and puppetry and animation. And I
Mm,
think there's a big future there, because I would always sit there and go, this performance poet or the slam poet, the performance poet, can get attention of this whole audience, and they can do a whole epic story in like under 3 minutes, because there became time rules and all kinds of other rules added, because poets would do things that made them make the competition a little tighter. And what I saw is, yeah, it was a fake competition, but it also gave an arena for a lot of us poets to meet each other and evolve into quote unquote what they call spoken word. But once again, I always put it back to it's performance poetry, man. It's like the highest level of theater mixed with incredible writing, and of course hip hop culture, like crazy in it. So
yeah, like the first time I seen anything relatively, I guess, close to like more of like a poetry slam or something was the Def Jam poetry that they used to put on.
yes.
And like Kanye West was on there. Who else? Alicia Keys was on there. I was like, oh, like, and this was, God, I found this in like 2011. And so I was just like, yo, these guys, whoa. And then there was a gentleman by the name of Gemini who was on there, and he heavily influenced the way that I approached poetry. Um, and around that time, I was just graduating high school, and some of my buddies were kind of getting into rap and into the hip hop scene, and that just wasn't for me. But I knew with this, it's like, oh, people actually sell books. Like that wasn't just Shakespeare. Like like people in today's age actually sell poetry books. Like that's rad. Like people still do that. Like there's actually events where poets get together. There's open mics. Like I didn't realize people did that. Like I didn't think that was I didn't my limited scope of artistry, just because of the dance scene. Like I knew there was dance sessions, I knew there was dance competitions, I knew there was gigs you could book because of your dancing, blah 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 blah. I just didn't realize that applied in these in these different spaces. Yeah, so I have a huge love for anything like spoken word, especially if it has a performative nature to it. Like somebody can really get to acting out, or like you said, like act in some kind of props, puppets. Bring not only what you're saying, because it's like poetry, as you know, poetry. There's a certain there's like a certain life that you bring with the words, right? Like that you're trying to instill into the people's head, right? And the way that we describe things, and maybe the pace in which we say something, the depth in which we say certain syllables, um, to also have that acted out with a prop, to me is as close to like hip hop choreography that somebody I feel like can get without mixing the two, because you're making something move to this count of your voice and this count of your your poem or whatever thing that you're talking about, you know what I mean? Which is really cool. It's just it's really cool to see those spaces explored, and definitely finally talk to someone who's got some real professionalism in it. um I did want to ask, like, because I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I have a Star Wars backpack up on my wall over here. Um, working on that in that caliber of space, right? Like you went from making $25 flyers for the homeboys, you know, for their events. Now you're working with, you know, the GOAT. What is that like? Like, what is like you're walking into the office that first day? Like, what is that experience? I know, like, I just know it must be jarring, like as an artist.
Well, like most of my life, I always like to use the term metaphysical. Like
Mm,
I had a lot of just incredible opportunities that I call very shifting and very blessed to have it enter my space. And I got the incredible opportunity at Lucasfilm because most people who go to work there who have kind of background like me in visual arts or animation or you know basically only get the opportunity to be like on a production crew,
mhm,
and you got to specifically do something. So if you're good at 3D modeling or you're good at storyboard art or anything like that. And just at the time that I got in there, George personally had a personal question. And the question was, how come there's not one of him, not specifically a filmmaker, but one of him graduating from every high school in America each year, like someone who's going to do something that's going to, influence the culture, through
mhm,
any art form or your even business adventure. And he actually had put this project to the side because he didn't really connect with anyone who had the background to help answer that question. And at the time, he was running what was called Lucasfilm Learning. And
mm,
he wanted to get into the space because, just like you said, you're a big Star Wars fan. He thought, he could get at kids that were either troubled or like me and you grew up in broken homes or
mhm,
and get their attention and get them, they could be a math genius or a science genius. And
yeah,
maybe you can use Star Wars to get them interested, in learning. But at the time, before I started working there, Lucasfilm was getting a lot of judgment from the society because they were going, "You're just marketing Star Wars.
mm,
Cool, you're making all these things, but you're bringing Star Wars into the classroom, so you just want to capitalize on it." And so
mhm,
he was really troubled by that. And so, like right before I started working there, he started making the transition to what is known now as GLEF, which is the George Lucas Educational Foundation. And so
okay,
he wanted to go nonprofit with it. And but he was troubled because he didn't really see how that could affect, because he's used to the commercial market, and
mhm,
getting at, people like us and kids like, and, just set record straight. I told him my story. I was never a Star Wars fan. A
mhm,
lot of artists that I came in contact, including Star Wars, I was more like, these guys make a living at doing this, and I do. So how do I get in on it? So, back to your question of like, what was the impact of going up to the big star level of working. And so I went through a whole series of interviews, and then eventually landed my last interview, and I got to talk directly with George. And the biggest thing I found out was just that, in environments like that, there is no new people.
Mm.
They look at every artist as having something unique, and that's why you get the opportunity, especially at the level he was, because Star Wars had already been made. He made the money. He was already, riding that big wave, Indiana Jones and all that, and so he was very interested, and I was very intimidated in the beginning, but he was very interested that I had a street art background. And then I had started to study fine arts, in college, and that I worked with troubled or disadvantaged youth.
Mm.
And he wanted to know basically what we could do. And so I got to work on an incredible project, and there were a bunch of different phases, but the first phase will explain, kind of answer your question. Um, we came up with this idea of, he hired me on, and he hired me on specifically for that. I mean, that I was a full-blown artist, street artist, and I could relate to that population of those kids, that there could be a genius in there, that just because they're disadvantaged. And why I say disadvantaged and non-accessible youth, because it could be a kid who doesn't come from a broken family, but the parents don't see that he's a genius in this certain area.
Mhm.
Want him to
Mhm.
be a lawyer or doctor, and
Mhm.
he's got some magic. And so the first project we did was it was a vision of George's, and he was like, what if we can make these kiosks, in the lobbies of all the movie theaters? So say me and you were buddies, and we went and saw Star Wars, and at the end you came out and you're like, I'm really into the ships, man. Those ships were amazing. And you might have some engineering mind that could connect with that level of like, wow, ships. And then
Mhm.
so we wanted to build, and this is a time when a lot of there wasn't the technology there is now with the touch screens and these iPads and all this interactive technology, but interactive multimedia was the term, and it started to come into being. And so he was like, what if we made a kiosk in the lobby, and then like me and you high school dudes, we can go outside and start clicking on the screen, and we could start with Star Wars, right? And
Mhm.
then it could start linking up to like real ships in the world, real space,
Yeah.
and like maybe even have someone from NASA come on the screen and tell us
Ooh.
about it, right? Or say I was into uh, some other aspect of Star Wars, and even the film aspect. So I was like, man, how'd they make Yoda?
Yeah.
I could start clicking on it, and they could show me an illustrator who's just working with a pencil and coming up with creature conceptual designs. And so that was the first project, and basically, you know, uh, tell a quick story of, to answer your question again, what is it like to enter that realm? Well, they have several places you can eat. Like, he treats his employees like incredible, right? And one of them is like cafeteria style, where you can go and just, get whatever food you want and line up, right? And then you go sit in the cafeteria and eat your food. Well, within the first week, I was sitting there, keeping myself kind of really still intimidated and shocked that I'm even, and I got to work at Skywalker Ranch, which
Wow.
most people don't know. That's not where production or industrial light and magic work or any of that. It's
Mhm.
George's place. And to this day, that's where the people of the word are, the storytellers, the lawyers, the people who deal with the word, not actually painting and drawing or making special effects. And I was eating my meal, and this guy comes up to me, and he's a weirdo. Like, he's like, like,
Mhm.
and he's like, you're new here. And he's like, I'm like, yeah, I'm new. And yeah, I'm just trying to keep to myself, be humble. I don't know what's going on. And then he starts poking at me, going, you're also working on the second floor. And that's where, Lucas is on the third floor. He's like, you're on the second floor, and you're an important dude. And I'm like, not that important, but yeah, I do work up there. And he's like, well, you know something? George doesn't let us know what's going on up there, so you're going to tell me. And I'm like, I don't know if I should be telling you whatever. And he basically was just a super nice guy, but creative and funky. I mean, funky as could be. And so I went back to my desk after lunch, and my boss comes in, and she's all, "You move quick." And I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And she's like, "You're having lunch already. You only been here for a couple weeks, and you're having lunch with Ben Burr." And I'm like, like I said, I was never a real Star Wars fan or anything, and I was learning a lot about the creation of Star Wars. That was one thing that was incredible being there, is I could, I had the opportunity to look through the library and all these conceptual sketches and notes, and she's like, you don't know who he is? I'm like, no. And so she goes in the other room and she gets a Star Wars book and she brings it back. And Ben Burr was the sound engineer that created all the original sounds for Star Wars. So he's the one who invented the sound for the lightsaber.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I seen some old video too where they were like they use like projectors and like the fans, like the sounds from the fans to make certain sounds in the movies and stuff. I was like, dude, these guys are too
Yeah,
creative.
the lightsaber came from an electric fence.
Yeah, it was crazy, like the different things that they showed.
And so that was the experience right there. And I think the biggest thing to answer your question is that I got treated, in accolades for, the art that I did my whole life, not necessarily my climb through any industry or, winning awards or anything, just real
Yeah.
honored that I had this crossroad of experience that was very valuable to them. So
Yeah, like um anytime, especially like when I'm talking to some of the younger ones, right? Like the younger dancers, and they talk about, oh, I want to do music videos and stuff one day, boom, boom, boom. I just want to get good. That's what they tell me. I want to get good. I'm like, fam, listen, you're good, right? Like if you are even booked, right? Or if you're at the audition, it's because you're good enough to make it, right? So the real thing that's going to separate you 99% of the time is how you interact with the people that's around you, you know? And I really like how you had the approach, even working with George Lucas. It's like, yo, I'm here for a job. Like I'm here to work. Like I'm not even a fan of this thing, like the thing that he created, but his creations, his creativity, the way he approaches it, like you could be a fan of that. And that's a whole nother avenue to be, like appreciative of somebody and their craft. Like there's a lot of dancers, and I think this even applies in art, like painting. Like there's a lot of forms of painting that it's not that I don't like it, I just don't understand, right? It doesn't make me like, I know there's a feeling that's supposed to be felt, I don't feel it looking at it, right? But there could be another form of art by the same artist where I'm like, yo, I resonate with this. Like this says something to me, just like dancing too, like ballet, don't understand it, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, don't understand nothing about those moves. But you show me like some like electric boogaloo, some of the guys who I grew up watching, that speaks to me, it's going to have a certain effect. um and I even tell them, like, so when you're approaching these type of opportunities, just make sure like you work right, be disciplined, know you're talented, know what you bring to the table. Like I'm a crumper. If they tell me, hey, you got a solo moment here, show us what you got, I'm not going to try to do ballet. I'm a crump because that's what I do, and they hired me knowing that's what I do, so just stick to being you. That's kind of something too, like the brand itself, the whole Corpse Collection brand, we really try to push is be you, embrace the things that make you different, because that's what truly as artists I feel like sets us apart, um and honestly, like just even thinking like that there's opportunities, that there was even an opportunity for me as a young artist to have those type of experiences, like that's so cool because I have kids, so it's like, man, one day, and my son really likes Star Wars, so it's like, bro, if you ever want to work with George Lucas, bro, you could do it, dog. Like I know somebody, like I actually talked to somebody who did it. uh that's so cool, bro. Listen, and I really appreciate your works, and I'm really thankful for you coming on, man. And I definitely do, because I know this one is probably going to take up a lot of the time of the episode. But I definitely wanted to talk to you about Matsu and what because I was even reading through the Wikipedia. It's one thing to read it, but then it's also another thing to hear it from the horse's mouth, you know. And so, like, what is it? What is it exactly? And what I guess like what are you trying to breathe into the world with this project?
Well, basically, Matsu actually began when I worked at Lucasfilm, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, it's basically it reflects a little bit of my story, right? But it definitely comes in at a time where the first premise is the a lot of the story plot changes from what's out there, and how it got evolved and changed in that sense. First of all, was George introduced me to things he was thinking about at the time, because it was the time the internet was starting to, come out and like I said, interact, what was called interactive multimedia, which is basically, web-based things now, and where it's headed with, with Web 3.0 and metaverses and all that type thing, right? But the two concepts were multi-platform storytelling. So he was seeing how, like, to advertise your movie or your film or your story, right? The gatekeepers are gone.
Mm-hmm.
There's no gatekeepers anymore. Like, you don't have to go to Netflix, and you don't even have to go to Warner Brothers and all that. Like, you can basically tell your story across multiple platforms. And since I've been a multidiscipline artist, it was perfect for me, because you can tell the story in a comic book. You can tell the story in, like, my book that I put out in 2017, which is called Symphony, right? And it's a, when most book collectors get that book, they're just like, I couldn't put it on the shelf. It has to sit out here because it doesn't go into any category, because I have poetry in it, I have storytelling, I have my sketches, I have my paintings, I have a graphic novel, a novella in it, a short graphic novel in it. And and also, multi-platform storytelling has come to me in the sense that the commercial is not just a commercial or a trailer anymore. It's actually part of telling you the tale. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you can get the platforms right, you can do a movie, you can do a animated short, and you can do animated in cutout form, stop motion animation. You can do it in claymation. You can do it. I make children's books, I call them picture books more than children's books. Make them picture books, make it in a comic, make it in every form that's ever told a story, and each one of them, I mean, Star Wars has kind of done that since it's gone to Disney too, with the
Mm-hmm.
Mandalorian and some of these offshoots, right? And also, another level of multi-platform storytelling, and I hope to do this more, right, is get more writers involved. So it's just not me create. And then George did that automatically. Like, I don't know if you know that, but like a lot of his stories, he went to his friends that are incredible novel writers and stuff, and they wrote all the side stories to Star Wars,
Yeah.
and became more of the world builder, and that's what I love to do. Um, and the other one was basically, interactive film, like, and the concepts and the kind of seeds to interactive film is, the kiosk thing again. But like, me and you go to a film, and right in the door there's kiosks that start asking us a bunch of questions.
Mm.
So they take feedback from us, like, like I don't know if you remember those old books where, like, you'd read the book and it said, if you want to go up the tree, go to page 32.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So that concept, but with internet and interactive media, to be able to alter the story and participate with the audience. So it's interactive storytelling. So Matsu is all built like that, right? And that's where my puppetry comes in. My puppet troupe is called the Funky Eye Puppets,
Mm-hmm.
and they're part of the Matsu universe. But I'm a huge fan, once again, of not necessarily the content, but the creator, Jim Henson, and the
Mm-hmm.
Muppets, right? And no one has really done anything with the Muppets since then. So I incorporate that apart, and we have time, I could bring out one of my puppets for you.
Absolutely.
But so the fungi puppets, they bring a whole nother element. And of course, we share the hip-hop culture, right? And I was also big into rock and roll culture and poetry slam culture, right? So I brought them all together. I mean, this story could be told from me just doing a spoken word performance, and with no props or nothing, me just telling you part of the story. And then I also went back to, I don't know how educated you are on like the Iliad, the Tale of the Genki,
Yes.
all these tales that were written,
Odyssey.
yeah, written by poets. And so they
Mhm.
weren't written like a novel or a story. They were written in a series of poems that just automatically connected. And I've been that way since, back to the hospital days. I'd write these poems and I put certain symbolism in it. And then if I start looking back, I'm like, that poem, this poem, that poem all adds up and it's telling this epic tale. So basically, Matsu on an entertainment level, right, is the continuation of Lord of the Rings, the continuation of Star Wars, the continuation all the way to, like, this is the multi-platform storytelling in that sense, all the way to continuing Garfield and The Simpsons, right, and Boondocks and Beavis and Butthead. I mean, like, everything that's ever been popular on that level is the history of Matsu.
Mm.
And then I also this helped me, I told you the separation of my culture also started to bring back culture, and two things in my life have done that, right? And maybe we'll find time to talk about it, but one is haiku,
Mhm.
the ancient Japanese short poem. And I pretty much spent my whole, almost my whole life dedicated to that art form, and more the brevity art form more than the American, what people know as a 575 syllable poem. I can talk about that forever, but haiku brought me back to what my grandma did. In Japanese is obachan. My obachan did, and just how I grew up. She didn't like, we couldn't speak together because she basically, after Hiroshima, she stopped speaking English, so she just spoke Japanese. So all I saw was scrolls around her house, and the kanji brushstrokes, and they were short.
Beautiful.
They were short poems. So haiku was one of them, right? And then the second one that entered my life, because I had been a big fan of Brian Froud, of Brian Froud, of, like, um, you know, uh, basically Lord of the Rings and that type of, European type folklore, right?
Mhm.
And at one point, I drew these creatures, and they weren't a lot like elves, and they weren't a lot like trolls and gnomes. They were kind of, because I was influenced by it, but I always had a different twist on it. And at one point, I was like, "There's got to be an equivalent, in my culture, and that might be able to link me back." And so I discovered Shigeru Mizuki,
Mhm.
and he specialized in what this word came to me, yokai. And I was like, yokai, and it resonated with me. I was like, yokai. And so I started learning a little bit more about Shigeru's work, and he's basically the grandfather of manga.
Mhm.
um, and he specialized in yokai. And of course, uh, uh, Mizuzaki, or the Japanese filmmaker, um, started in Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, all these. Like, I mean, there's got to be some root to this, and that's when I found yokai. And yokai, roughly in English, means strange spirit.
Mm.
It basically
Okay.
goes back to Japanese folklore, and they are the ghouls, the monsters, the creatures. But in the story of Matsu, I evolved it, because at one point I was like, yeah, they are, and Wikipedia and stuff, right? They are monsters and ghosts, and and ghouls, and really dark things. But I'm like, Japan has a big history of deities too. Like, there's got to be the lights, just like Star Wars, right? There's got to be the Jedi. There's
Yep.
no way that you can be a strange spirit and not have the light too. That I acknowledge the darkness with light. And so I started researching this, and of course Shigeru Mizuki, if anyone wants to know, go back to that. He has a whole town in Japan that have all his creatures. And what Shigeru introduced me to was, you can go on Wikipedia and learn all about yokai, right? and they document all of them. And of course, a lot of them are monsters and goblins and all this, right? And they don't document a lot of the light side.
Hmm.
And so what Shigeru introduced me to, I started noticing in work, is he not only used the ancient yokai that of course were created by the poets, you know, the folk tellers, storytellers were like, when they, that's why there are a lot of demons, right? A lot of stuff they couldn't talk about, they had to make a creature for it, just like Star Wars does, right? Like Darth Vader, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, which is the dark side and fear and hatred, right? And so I started noticing that Shigeru Mizuki created his own yokai to tell stories. And then that's when I just clicked in, and I started going through my sketchbooks and starting to see that I, you know, just my blood was doing an ancient tradition that has been long forgotten. And that was when I felt so blessed. I had the gifts of not only being a poet, being an illustrator and a painter too, and a creature concept, you know, that I got that a lot from Lucas too, being able to create these fantastical creatures, you know, like Yoda is not a monster, you know, he's a deity, he's a, you know, he's an ancient Jedi. And then that goes back to my father. And so Matsu incorporates yokai, and I invent these new yokai. And the basis of the story of Matsu, like I was telling you, it shifted the plot from all these stories, and it really is shifted from what Hollywood is kind of sunk into people. And the first concept is Matsu has no war. It takes place in a time where there's no war. War is forgotten. It doesn't exist anymore. And so that changes the whole plot. And then at the center of the universe, when I tell these stories and I write these poems, it influences it like crazy. But there, you know, in any great story, I don't know if you're familiar with Joseph Campbell.
Yes.
Yeah. So in any great story, it has the hero's journey. So there's got to be the dark and the light. You know, like in one of my poems, I say, you know, they only create the darkness so the light gets brighter.
Ooh, beautiful.
Right? And so, you know, I had to like think about, there is some darkness. So in Matsu, there is darkness, but it pretty much, I'm glad to know that you're a dancer and an artist and all that, because a lot of the core story of Matsu is what I believe has happened to a lot of my fellow artists, you know, and how some of them, I mean, even back to the story of the youth I was talking about with the Lucasfilm experience, like, you know, they miss an opportunity, and so they may land in jail, but not necessarily, you know, behind bars in prison, the jail of working a 9 to 5.
Yeah.
What happened to my father? You know, that's why I planted that seed of my father. So the basic conflict in Matsu is it has this one character, and his original name was Tomic, right? And he was like Luke, right? Or Anakin in Star Wars. He was going to balance basically the Force. He's going to bring back creativity and show people that it is just as valid as a medical doctor, you know, even in the healing arts, right? And he was going to balance that. But they live in a time, this is the beginning of chapter 4, and there's 7 novels in Matsu. So that's multi-platform storytelling, right? So it follows kind of the Harry Potter kind of thing, right? Like in written form of 7 novels. And basically Tomic lives in a time where all the artists got to put on a mask, you know, every time they go to work, right? And the yokai artists at that time are cloud mountain sculptors and cloud painters, and you know, like when autumn turns into autumn, right? All the yokai are painting the leaves.
Oh, beautiful.
Right? So they're magical elemental artists, which are a big part of yokai, especially because they're from Japan, right? So water is a big thing, right? So Tomic is this incredible artist, grew up like multidiscipline, like, you know, he can do magical arts all across the board, right? Why there's a beautiful sunset, right? There's sunset painters.
Okay.
Right. And so Tomic basically has to, you know, like, for example, like if you were a cloud painter, right, during the day, you're a weatherman.
Okay.
You know, a lot of us, right? We got to get by, make a living, right? And
right.
mask, right? And like
Right.
we're working at 7-Eleven or whatever.
I
And we
like that, the concept of the mask part, that's great.
and so then basically Tomic, he gets caught up in basically you would call, the either the seven deadly sins or the sin of capitalism in the modern world, of
Mhm.
materialism and all that, right? Addiction, everything, and that paints a lot of my street background, and basically at one point he can't go back to being yokai because he's gone so far into human, frailties and darkness.
Ooh.
So basically he explodes and he tries to put himself back together with technology. Like, so that's where like Terminator 2 and, those type of stories come in. He tries to like, use bionics to put himself back together and it doesn't work. But he
Okay.
doesn't explode as a human because he's not a human.
Mhm.
He's a yokai,
As a
right?
yokai, yeah.
So he explodes silently to humans
Hmm.
and he becomes the Atomicon. And he wipes out the whole spirit world, which in the story of Matsu, he wipes out all inspiration on planet Earth.
Alright.
So what happens,
Matsu, let's go.
the seven great Kappa yokai, which are the water goblins, no one knew they could fly. And that morning after Atomicon basically blew, all the really hardcore yokai, which represent a lot of us artists, could not exist on planet Earth. Right. So it's the metaphor of depression and sorrow and drug addiction and all these things that happen to a lot of great artists, great MCs,
Yes.
right? And basically they went up and toward the sun and they carved a hole behind the sun and they created a portal and this is where sci-fi comes in, right? Because I'm a big fan of Gene Roddenberry and Star Trek and and the whole Star Wars universe, right? And how they
Mhm.
created it and why George as a storyteller picked space, right? But in Matsu it shifts the storyline too, right? Because it's not space. They create a portal to an ultimate dimension on Earth, so they're still here but they
Ooh.
can't exist like they did. So in the story of Matsu, right, there was there was a Matsu that stood on Jimi Hendrix's shoulder, when he played the Star Spangled Banner. There was one that was on Tupac's shoulder, when he
Okay.
started rapping his street rap and inventing a new way of rap, or Biggie was there for Biggie, or any of the b-boy dancers, all the way back to the guy that made the first smoothie. They were spirits, like that
Yes.
old cliche of the devil and the angel, right? But they were angels that were like, man, go for it, dude, do something. I know it doesn't seem pliable that you can make a living or whatever, but do it. Invent something, right? And so basically, this alternative dimension is called 96542, and it appears like almost a huge Jupiter, right? And it has 6 rings around it, almost like Saturn, right? And then all these they're not planets, they look like planets, but they're spheres and realms are on each one of these rings, and they're all elemental. So like on the first ring there's do I have my book, I could show you it. Basically they all are elemental, so all the yokai that know who they are somewhat, right, go to this realm and they live inside. That's why they're spheres and realms. They live inside of the
Ooh.
they live inside these realms. And basically, I haven't told anyone this publicly, but I'd be willing to tell this. So basically, it seems like the most incredible world. Like, they got everything because the
Mhm.
yokai recreated it, right? But the
Yes.
one thing that's missing is they can't inspire the artists on Earth anymore. And that was
Oh.
their lifeblood, right? And so they're living in this realm, and then that's where the story of Matsu really starts unfolding, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
there's 96542.
Whoa, that is amazing.
So the other side of the story, right, is
Wow.
Mir's my journey, right? And there's this young boy who, and this connects it. I don't know if you're a fan of Pokemon or
Mhm.
your kids are, right? Like like Ash in Pokemon, it adds kind of a human element to the story, right? So the same time, dimensionally, not in the actual years, there's this boy named Shigin, and he's the boy right there, right?
Okay.
Right, and he basically is growing up in the 90s in San Francisco, right? And he is sent to the hospital right here. And so it kind of mirrors my story in the sense that they didn't know what he was diseased with, but the doctor told them he was going to die.
Okay.
So in the hospital, right? And this is where, it mirrors a lot of me. He was a painter and a poet. So he went in the hospital, right? And he started drawing and painting 96542 and all the creatures. And he didn't know he was doing that, right? He's just doing this, right? And so this is actually the beginning of book 4 too. He doctor comes in one weird day and tells him he's healed, and they don't know why. And so then that's where it mirrors my life a lot. He leaves the hospital, right? And he tries to go back into society, be amongst his high school friends and everything. And he's totally disconnected because he got removed from that, that popular culture time when, dating and all that was going on. And so basically he goes back home and he just kind of hides. He's a musician too. He's an MC. He's also into martial arts, right? So he gets basically really spiritual and goes into his life of just doing that because a lot of his friends have moved on and they don't understand him and he can't relate. And then basically the end of the graphic novel, in the beginning, you saw the turtle and the dog, right? Those are his pets. And so the end of the graphic novel in Symphony is he sitting in his room and all of a sudden he hears these two people talking. And they're actually the creatures. So in the beginning, they're Tayo and Raiko, which are his pet turtle and his pet Akita dog. And so basically what happens is in yokai, right, some of the most popular ancient yokai, right, are the Kappa yokai and the Tatsu. And the Tatsu are the water dragons. Right, those are yokai, right? And so over here is the turtle you can see right there, and then there's Ryo the dog, and look at Ryo's tail, right? He has a huge tail, right? And so what happens at the end of the graphic novel, because it's basically the story of Taiko, and Taiko is a Kappa yokai, which is a water goblin. Right, so he's actually a water goblin, and them two figure it out. That unfolds the story a lot. They figured out. There's whole stories about that. They figured out how to come back to Earth and be in animal form, and they're some of the first creatures that are trying to figure out how to come back. And so basically, in the end, there, right? See, there's a Kappa.
Okay,
that's the Kappa Taiko, and then the Ryo, the Japanese dragon. And so basically, a little bit about Kappa. Kappa are basically like, fish, turtles, ducks, any type of waterfowl, and they're water goblins. But in the ancient Japanese myth, they have this dish on their head, like an opening, and it has water in it, right? But of course, the ancient Japanese poets, they didn't tell why. So that's why there's a lot of room for someone like me to start interpreting why that is. And of course, that's where I go back to metaphysics. And if you had a hole in your head, you got a direct connection, right, to the higher realm. It has water in it too, right? And so, like in the store, I do all kinds of stuff. Is it a satellite dish? Is it a home opening? Is it right? And so basically, what happens at that point is Shigin starts to talk to them, and they start telling him that this whole 96542, even your nightmares about this Atomica Con are real. And that's where you can see where multi-platform storytelling starts happening. Is basically it starts to enter the realm of That's why it can be in a comic book, and that's why Matsu works in the form of even Ziggy or Garfield, or any of the Calvin and Hobbes, any of the classic cartoons, and you can tell all, even Peanuts, like
Yeah. Oh my God, the peanuts.
Shigen can interact with a lot of these creatures as Peanuts, and of course Pokemon, Dragon Ball Z, all those. And so, in short, that's basically Matsu.
Dude, I love there's such and even as a dancer, right? Like, and even just as a person, I'm very into the metaphysical aspects of things, right? Like, the Egyptians looked at a ruler or a plum or a square with certain metaphysical traits, and I love the esoteric meanings behind these things, and the fact that you're also able to weave that in, also weave in these parallels with your life, also with lessons about life. And I mean, the artwork is phenomenal. Like, even just seeing these little pieces here now, it's like, whoa, like I felt weird growing up, like as an older kid, but I still loved illustrated books because the picture to me gave me the words that much more life. Like we even spoke about a little bit earlier, just naturally as poets, we have to paint a certain vision using the depth of our words, but then you're also taking it to another level by also giving them also the visual interpretation, so that there's not only a language to make us feel, but there's also something visually to also help us, either confirm and deepen those feelings, or maybe kind of send our brain on a twist and make us think about things a little differently. That's beautiful, man. I like listening to you. I was just like dumbfounded by the depth that you have with it. Um, and I know as well, there was also your gumroad.com that you wanted to make sure that you promoted. Did you want to talk about that real quickly?
Yeah, Gumroad is a great platform if you haven't been on there. It was started, I think, by an artist in San Francisco who wanted to sell a lot of his works independently, and it's grown into a great platform. So over there, I have a lot of my original hand painted paintings, and of a lot of Matsu characters. I love painting the Tatsu. I love to make them smiling too, and not so evil looking. And I also offer my courses. So like I do a course on how to paint on leather, and I love painting hats. I work in the kind of graph tradition of hip hop. I paint on everything: clothes, hats, shoes. And so I have tutorials about that. And then I'm down to my last 25 of symphony, and symphonies for sale on there. Right.
Yeah, I seen that on there. I seen a, course for wood burning, everything also, as well as like, yeah, some of your hand painted stuff. I mean, it's just beautiful. The symphony book, yeah, the original leather. That one I was even interested in because I am Native American and we do a lot of leather work.
Mhm.
And a part of my regalia, there's some leather, pieces that I have, and I've been wanting to paint them. And I'm just kind of like, well, I don't want to just hit it with normal like Angelus like fabric paint, dude. I need to get like good paint and figure out some good techniques because there is some designs and stuff that I want to make sure that I throw on there. But I was looking through all of your stuff, man, and your work is just, I mean, it's breathtaking. And I really do have a love for other artists and whatever medium it might be. Like I was even kind of talking about it earlier. Like even though I might not understand it, I love it. Like if it speaks to me, man, I love it. And I just love anybody who takes the time to create something and put it into the world. Um, like even talking about metaphysical, we had this conversation, me and one of my buddies was like, we as artists, you know, we come so close to this power of creation, that is outside sexual explicitity. We don't, as dancers, we go and we're bringing out this thing that, in 10 years time, somebody who practiced it and learned it, when they hear that song, it's going to come to them. maybe not the whole step, maybe the whole routine will come back to them. But they're like, hey, I remember this. Like, oh, we did this on this move and we did this, like, and even for like artists, painters, like, they pick up a paintbrush and it might feel weird after a few years of not picking one up. But after a while, it's going to feel like home. It's going to feel like home again. It's going to be like, yo, this is just an extension of my hand, this paintbrush here. Which I always thought was really, to me, when I watched like any videos of like those old school Japanese, like, with just those long, thick brush strokes, I always felt like, yo, this is like they're painting like it's an extension of their body, like an extension of their being is coming out onto this paper right now. Like it's wonderful, man. So I really do want to give you a shout out on that Gumroad, because your artwork's beautiful, and I think a lot of people will benefit off of any kind of course you have to offer, in the book as well. I mean, just even looking at it and hearing you talk about it, it's amazing, the stuff you're doing, bro.
Thank you.
Listen, we are here at the end of the show. I want to say thank you again, for real. Like, I don't think I could ever say it enough. Just the support and you coming and sharing your story a little bit. I hope we can do this again one day. Is there any advice or little like gem that you want to drop out for the public, whoever's going to watch this once I post it up on Spotify?
I could end with a short Matsu poem if you want.
Please. Yes, please.
All that was bound to happen was because way back when I took my pen man ship and I graduated to this degree of music, which plays louder than any machine, with fantastical creatures walking the high beam. A creature celebration, a show the world has never seen. You see, I've been where the wild things are. I've even wished upon a star. I felt the sparkling lightning that has all struck through the ages, to know the world is made for creature stages. Those who have gone where the sidewalk ends, to be able to say, I will, I can, I won't sit still. I'm going to fly out this windowsill toward Neverland, into the rabbit's hole. With Kabuto the Bro and Colory Bauer and Doodle Demucci, that's where it's at, with their inker painter caps, while Duder and Bauer paint their custom snapbacks to Electric Boogaloo Creature Band will make you stomp your feet and clap your hands to the mighty breeze of the Baku horn. Sitting in will be the funky forloans with a verse from Bam Badabird, a Badaboon melody you never heard, and a phone's painting portals on canvases from the sprayophone. It's so fabulous as Shigen discovers new creatures every day, all in the Matsu Chronicle, which is the motto, is to continue the play.
Wow. Oh my God. Shout out Electric Boogaloos, man, for inspiring lifelongs of people. That was phenomenal. Thank you so much for blessing the podcast with that one.
Yes.
Everybody, the smoking section, check out the Gumroad. It will be in the episode description. I Paint Creatures, my man IPC. Thank you so much, brother. I'll shoot you a message in the DMs right now. All right.
Shout out to the Corpse S Collection.
Thank you, brother. Yes, sir. Thank you. You guys, I Paint Creatures. That was absolutely fucking phenomenal. And there is something special to people, like artists, who really put their work out there, right? And then especially when you become the person that the younger you needed, right? Like that, to share your story in such a unique way that you can also impact the other little boys and girls out there, right? You can also say, hey, I've been there too, right? Like to say, hey, I've been there and I've came through it, and this is what is on the other side for you. Just believe, just stick with it. Be you. Like, be you daily. I shared on the last podcast, because that was just phenomenal with Gino, and then here now also with IPC. You guys being your authentic self and being your true self is the most, like, it's the purest form of love that you could ever share to the world, but that you could also show yourself. And I know it sounds selfish and it sounds weird to say like, "Oh, I love myself." Fam, we need a little bit more of that in the world. Um, show the same love to yourself that you show to others. And this is a perfect, I mean, it's just a beautiful example of that. To step outside your bounds, share your story in a way where you're telling your story in a true way. And you're also impacting somebody else's story that's also happening in a true way that might just look a little bit like yours. And I think that's beautiful. And I think that needs to be celebrated. Yeah, IPC, guys, that's gonna be going up on Spotify here within the next day or so. Y'all know me, I get quick on it. Shout out to everybody who tuned in. Shout out to everybody who's gonna tune in. Will, all that. Like always, corpsecollection.com. I hope you guys have a good day, week, month, year, and life.